With that, I'm going to go ahead and hit the record button, and Pam, I'm going to pass control over to you, and we'll get going.
Okay, great. All right, I'm gonna.
There we go.
Can I minimize this little go-to box?
Yeah, there should be an arrow pointing sort of to the right, in an orange box. But we cannot. We don't see it. We only see your.
Okay.
Yeah, we only see your
I'm the
slides.
only one.
Yep, you are.
Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. As Joe mentioned, I work for the Illinois Heartland Library System as the metadata cataloger. And today we're going to talk about FRBR, which is the functional requirements for bibliographic records. Okay. I'm sorry, I've got a bit of a sore throat, so bear with me. Sounding a little froggy today. Okay, so what is the definition of FRBR? It's actually a conceptual entity relationship model, which was developed by the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions, otherwise known as IFLA, that relates user tasks of retrieval and access in online library catalogs and bibliographic databases from a user's perspective. It represents a more holistic approach to retrieval and access, as the relationships between the entities provide links to navigate through the hierarchy of relationships. The model is significant because it's separate from specific cataloging standards such as AACR2 or International Standard Bibliographic Description, otherwise ISBD. And yes, I actually retrieved this definition from Wikipedia, because Wikipedia is not all bad. Just to be aware, you will see the spelling of catalogs with the U and not the U. Wikipedia uses the European spelling of catalog. We, of course, here in the United States don't use the U. So I am aware that there are different spellings, and I'm just making you aware of that too. Okay, so this is just a little humor. We've got Ryan Gosling saying, "Hey girl, if I tell you I love you in a note, is it an item that is a manifestation of my expression of love for you? It's all so confusing." And he's right. Not that he actually said that, but if he did, FRBR, WEMI, RDA, they can all be confusing. Hopefully some of the confusion of FRBR will be eradicated today. But maybe I shouldn't promise anything, but we will hope so. Sadly, we don't get to look at Ryan Gosling anymore. Now we're going to look at groups of entities. So FRBR conceptualizes three groups of entities. So group one consists of the products of intellectual or artistic endeavor, in other words, publications. Group two comprises those entities responsible for intellectual or artistic content, in other words, a person or corporate body. And then group three includes the entities that serve as subjects of intellectual or artistic endeavor, such as concept, object, event, and place. And that is taken from the LIS wiki with the HTTP there for you if you want to look at that later. So this is what FRBR is all about, these three groups. Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the group one entities. The internal subdivision of group one entities is important as well. FRBR specifies that intellectual or artistic products include the following types of entities. So you've got the work, which is a distinct intellectual or artistic creation, the expression, the intellectual or artistic realization of a work, the manifestation, the physical embodiment of an expression of a work, and then the item, which is a single exemplar of a manifestation. And this, of course, is WEMI, excuse me, which we are going to be talking about next week. So I'm not going to delve too deeply into WEMI, but so if you can register or log in next week, we will talk more about WEMI, which is fun. Okay. So what about the relationships of group one entities? FRBR also specifies particular relationships between classes of group one entities. So a work is realized through one or more expressions. each of which is embodied in one or more manifestations, and then each of which is exemplified by one or more items. And again, I took that from the LIS wiki. Okay. So I'm sure all of you have heard about find, identify, select, obtain, and navigate, or FISON. Those have been the principles behind cataloging for centuries. So FRBR's entities are the basis of cataloging records, it says, and catalogs exist so that users can perform 5 basic tasks, which are find, identify, select, obtain, and navigate. FRBR has added the 5th unofficial task, which is called relate. And that's according to Denton, sorry. So much snot, sorry. So when your patron is in your library, these are the actual steps that the patron is taking to get the items they're seeking, right? So a cataloger's goal is to describe an item so that patrons can find it, and that has not changed over the history of cataloging. IFLA's Library Reference Model, or LRM, adds E for Explore to FISO, so that it'll now be FISOE, which is find, identify, select, obtain, and explore. Explore is to discover resources using the relationships between them, and thus places the resources in a context. And that's from the IFLA Library Reference Model, a conceptual model for bibliographic information. And I'm sure all of you are aware that RDA has their beta toolkit available right now. And so this revised RDA, once they have all of the releases released and available for everybody to use, that is going to be based on IFLA's LRM, which is the library reference model. So that's going to be the new basis for cataloging for RDA. Okay, hopefully that wasn't too confusing. All right, so just another humorous slide. What do you mean you want to call me FRBR? Hopefully, well, maybe some of you have called your pets FRBR, and that's okay. So this is just a reminder to maintain your humor during your cataloging process. I used to tell my students that, you know, we're not doing heart surgery. So if you make mistakes, it's okay as long as you go back and correct them. And that is one grumpy looking cat. Okay, so here are the FRBR entity levels. This is actually from a presentation that Barbara Tillett did in 2002, which I know was quite a while ago, but it's still relevant. If you do look up the original presentation, she had it in more neon colors, so I tried to make it a little less visually, I don't know, stunning. And maybe it's just me, I have issues with colors, so hopefully the blue and purple work. Okay, so this is showing the family of works using the work, expression, and manifestation as basically levels. The FRBR model was intentionally kept to the 4 levels of entities in group 1, and that means work, expression, manifestation, and item. And even though item's not shown here, that's what this is based on. So they're using these 4 levels, or 3 that are shown, to try to keep things simple. One can easily add many more levels to further categorize, as catalogers love to do, but conceptually 3 or 4 seems to work quite well to meet the user tasks and objectives of a catalog. You can have works that can be thought of as in a family of works where there may even be a super work, as Ramat Fatahi and Barbara Tillett, I believe Martha Yee called it, but that would be one of the family of works. So if you look at the diagram, the work is referring to the novel or the movie or, you know, or the DVD or the CD, you know, and then the expression for the novel, you have your original text, you could have a translation, and you could also have a critical edition. For the movie, you're just going to have your original version. And then the manifestation of the critical edition could be published as a paper or a PDF or HTML file. All right, and this is another diagram that I borrowed from Barbara Tillett that she created in 2001. And this is all about the work, but it's breaking it down into three relationships. So at the top, you've got equivalent, derivative, and descriptive. Those are the three relationships. And then you've got all these different items and forms and expressions. But at the bottom, you'll see it starts, if you look at the triangles, you'll see it starts with the original, and then it goes to same work, and then it keeps flowing into new works. And then at the total bottom of the diagram, you've got same expression on the left to new expression, and then a new work. And then the dashed lines are showing where the cataloging rules are cutting off. So they're cutting off between the slight modifications and then the adaptations and change of genre. So, so this is Tillett's update of the taxonomy of bibliographic relationships that was published in 2001 by Kluwer. And it shows a continuum of the relationships of a family of works, moving from left to right, from equivalent content at the left to descriptions of other works at the right. So if we look at the types of works and expressions in terms of the FRBR model, this entire picture can be seen as a family of works. Those that are equivalent are from the same expression of the work. Once we introduce a change to the content, like a translation, which is in that, it's on the left-hand side in the middle in that pale yellow color, we have a new expression of the same work. But once that derivation crosses the magic line of becoming more of the work of another person or corporate body, we consider it a new work. So that's anything past that dashed line. But in this recursive relationship, it too is part of the family of related works, even when the work moves on to be only describing a work in the family at the right end of this continuum. The entities in descriptive relationships can even be considered to be in subject relationships in FRBR terminology and conceptual model. The ability to inform the user of these related works ties back to the collocating and finding functions of a catalog again. And if you want to learn more about that, you can look up Relationships in the Organization of Knowledge by Carol Bean and Rebecca Green. Okay, hopefully that wasn't too confusing. All right, so this is building on the slide before. So we had relationships. So FRBR is built upon relationships between and among entities. So you've got equivalence, derivative, and descriptive as relationships. And let's move on so we can further explore those relationships. So the equivalence relationships exist between exact copies of the same manifestation of a work or between an original item and reproductions of it, so long as the intellectual content and authorship are preserved. So examples include reproductions such as copies, issues, facsimiles and reprints, photocopies, and microfilms. So in an equivalence relationship, the content needs to be unchanged. All right, let's move on to our derivative relationships. So derivative relationships exist between a bibliographic work and a modification based on the work. Examples include additions, versions, translations, summaries, abstracts, and digests. Adaptations that become new works but are based on old works. Genre changes, and then new works based on the style or thematic content of the work. So in a derivative relationship, the content is changed, but all works are still related to the original work. Okay, for the descriptive relationships, those exist between a bibliographic entity and a description, criticism, evaluation, or review of that entity, such as between a work and a book review describing it. Descriptive relationships also include annotated editions, casebooks, commentaries, and critiques of an existing work. So these are probably the farthest away from the original work because these are just describing the work. Okay, so what is a work? A work, and for the next few slides, I'm giving you the definition that IFLA created in 2008, and then the newest definition that they gave in 2017. So in 2008, IFLA defined a work as an abstract entity. There's no single material object one can point to as the work. We recognize the work through individual realizations or expressions of the work, but the work itself exists only in the commonality of content between and among the various expressions of the work. When we speak of Homer's Iliad as a work, our point of reference is not a particular recitation or text of the work, but the intellectual creation that lies behind all the various expressions of the work. So that was the 2008 definition. Now from 2017, IFLA says that the work is the intellectual or artistic content of a distinct creation. A work is an abstract entity that permits the grouping of expressions that are considered functional equivalents or near equivalents. A work is a conceptual object. No single material object can be identified as the work. So as you can see from these two definitions, IFLA has changed the definition of work from 2008 to 2017. Not by a lot, but somewhat. All right, so let's move on to expression. So IFLA defined expression in 2008 as the specific, intellectual, or artistic form that a work takes each time it is realized. Expression encompasses, for example, the specific words, sentences, paragraphs, etc., that result from the realization of a work in the form of a text, or the particular sounds, phrasing, etc., resulting from the realization of a musical work. The boundaries of the entity expressions are defined, however, so as to exclude aspects of physical form, such as typeface and page layout, that are not integral to the intellectual or artistic realization of the work as such. So that was the 2008, and then in 2017, IFLA defined expression as a distinct combination of signs conveying intellectual or artistic content. An expression is the specific intellectual or artistic form that a work takes each time it is realized. Expression encompasses, for example, the specific words, sentences, paragraphs, etc., that result from the realization of a work in the form of a text, or the particular sounds, phrasing, etc., resulting from the realization of a musical work. The boundaries of the entity expressions are defined, however, so as to exclude incidental aspects of physical form, such as typeface and page layout for a text, unless, due to the nature of the work, these are integral to the intellectual or artistic realization of the work as such. So if you look at these two definitions, there really wasn't a lot changed between 2008 and 2017, except at the end of the newer definition, they included for a text unless, due to the nature of the work, these are integral. So there's not a lot of difference. Okay, so let's move on to manifestation. So in 2008, IFLA defined manifestation as an entity. Manifestation represents all the physical objects that bear the same characteristics in respect to both intellectual content and physical form. When a work is realized, the resulting expression of the work may be physically embodied on or in a medium such as paper, audio tape, videotape, canvas, plaster, etc. That physical embodiment constitutes a manifestation of the work. So that was the 2008 definition. And then in 2017, they define manifestation as a manifestation results from the capture of one or more expressions onto a carrier or set of carriers. As an entity, manifestation represents the common characteristics shared by those carriers in respect to both intellectual or artistic content and physical form. So they're bringing a lot of RDA terminology into this definition, this newer one, than they did in 2008, which makes sense. So in my opinion, this definition has changed the most. The 2008 definition has an entity representing physical objects, while the 2000 definition has a manifestation resulting from the capture of one or more expressions and then representing common characteristics, as well as just talking a lot about carriers. Okay, so let's look at item. So IFLA defined item in 2008 as the entity defined as item is a concrete entity. It is in many instances a single physical object, in other words, a copy of a one-volume monograph, a single audio cassette, etc. There are instances, however, where the entity defined as item comprises more than one physical object, in other words, a monograph issued as 2 separately bound volumes, a recording issued on 3 separate compact discs, etc. Then in 2017, they defined item as in terms of intellectual or artistic content and physical form. An item exemplifying a manifestation normally reflects all the characteristics that define the manifestation itself. An item is in many instances a single physical object, but in other cases an item may consist of multiple physical pieces or objects. An item may be a part of a larger physical object, for example, when a file is stored on a disk, which also contains other files. The portion of the disk holding the file is a physical carrier or item. And notice again, they're bringing some RDA terminology into that more current definition. So from the work to the item, we're moving from the abstract creative expression to the physical representation of that idea. Okay, so here is an example of the work expression manifestation. So if you look at the number 1 arrow, that's pointing to the creator of the work, who is Marie-Noël Bayard. And then the second arrow is pointing to the title of the work, which is in the year 240, and that's the crochet. And then the third arrow is pointing to the 240 subfield L, where it says English, and that's the language of the expression. And then the fourth arrow is pointing to the 245, where the title of the manifestation, which is the same as the other title, which is crochet. So if you as a cataloger can understand where the FRBR elements are entered into a MARC record, that can help you map the elements to the MARC fields, or maybe just give you a better understanding of how all this is working together. I hope. Okay. Karen Coyle participated in the Semantic Web and Libraries Conference in 2015, and I've got a link to the YouTube video there. And she discusses history of cataloging, FRBR, and linked data, which is, well, I found it very interesting. So if you have a chance to watch it, it's not very long. But she calls it mistakes have been made. And when she's discussing the history of cataloging, FRBR, and linked data, she describes WEMI, the work expression manifestation item, as nesting information rather than linear, because the other experts who talk about FRBR and WEMI, it's all kind of in a linear way, but Karen Coyle says it's more of, it's nesting information. And she also believes that libraries are mining the wrong data to be linked. So Librarians just need to be aware of the data in bibliographic records. Does every element need to be linked or just certain data? And Coyle just provides a different perspective from the other experts that I have read and listened to. So I just thought that was kind of a different thing. So hopefully you'll have time to listen to her talk. I just have my resources here. I also included FRBR quizzes that are on the Library of Congress website if you want to quiz yourself. Those are kind of fun to take, although maybe I have a warped sense of fun. And just some more resources. I've just got the links to all the two memes and then the information that I used in this presentation. And then questions. And I gave you a lovely color palette to look at.
Okay, so just as a reminder, the slides here today, you should have received in an email. They're also available on the handouts tab on your go-to webinar control panel. So at this point, I know we'll be finishing up early today, but if there are any questions, I would encourage you all to use the questions pane on your control panel to send any questions to Pam. So I will just pause here for one moment while you hopefully think of questions.
Otherwise, we'll make you come up with something, Joe.
It's been a lot of years since I've done cataloging, so I don't know how useful that will be. Okay.
And I don't think I can see the questions, maybe, I'm not sure.
Probably, yeah, with the settings you probably cannot, but I'll read them so that not only you can hear them, but everybody can hear them, yes. While we're waiting, Pam, can you talk a little bit about what you are going to cover next week on the webinar? Because I think a lot of the people that are on today's webinar are going to be participating in next week.
Yeah, I'm going to be talking about WEMI, which is the work expression manifestation item, and I've got some diagrams of how all that works out, and then I'm going to talk a little bit more about IFLA's new library reference model, which is, like I said earlier, that's what the new RDA is based on. Mm-hmm. I'm not an expert on the library reference model, but you can ask me questions about it. I just might not be able to answer. It's pretty new. It came out at the end of last fall, I think, mm-hmm. But I just recently read it. It's you might not want to read it when you're tired. It's very, it's in a scholarly voice. It's, which is not necessarily my favorite thing to read, but sure. It's got good information. Okay. Maybe other people enjoy that challenge. I don't necessarily.
Okay, so actually a couple questions have come in, the first of which is sort of an example or scenario question. So here's the example. If we were looking at a movie like Blade Runner that had several versions, mm-hmm. Would Blade Runner the movie be considered the work, the director's cut, the final cut, or the theatrical version be the expression? And then the VHS, DVD, or Blu-ray be the manifestation. So I guess asking if we have that right.
Okay, can I go, all right, can I go back?
Oh, to your,
let's see.
Yeah, there you go.
Let's look at, okay, so, in my opinion, so like the director's cut would be, I think all of the cut are what I would consider to be revisions and different editions, right? So they would be to the left of that dotted line. You know, so they're just various versions of the original work, which would be Blade Runner, right? Because you don't have any parodies or something that's like a total adaptation, right? So they would all still be on that left. So they would be new expressions, but they would still be related to that original work. Hopefully that answered your question.
And then whether VHS, DVD, or Blu-ray, the manifestation, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, a few more questions that have come in. So this one's a little more specific to where you are at Illinois Heartland Library System, but the question of whether IHLS is doing anything to, let's put in quotes, FRBRize its OPAC for the share catalog. Whether you're aware of anything.
Well, I'm not sure, like, exactly what are they asking?
Mm-hmm. Well, and if, let's see.
I mean, the thing is, okay, so no matter what library system we work at, we're at this point kind of stuck with what our software, the ILSs, can do. And not that we can't give input. But I mean, I know, you know, like you can get icons, is that what you're talking about? Like you can get icons from different fixed fields and stuff like that. But as far as I know, IHLS isn't doing anything differently than any, like you guys are. But I don't, I don't know.
And as a kind of follow-up, I guess it's wondering if the ILS software there has the capability. For example, RSA, Resource Sharing Alliance, is working with Circe Dynex on a new FRBR enhancement for their catalog. So I don't know if anything.
I don't know. I can ask though. I don't do any of that kind of stuff.
Sure.
And we use Polaris.
Right. Well,
so,
we can always, and I have the person who asks the questions contact info, and so we can always circle back to that, maybe
sure.
with a colleague or someone there at Heartland.
Yeah, I can ask.
And then another question, just if you are able to maybe give the one person who's still maybe a little confused about the difference between manifestation and item, and whether you could maybe give another a real life, so to speak, example, or try to explain that a little more.
I can try. I know. Well, and I mean, you know, I think we're all confused by this because, especially when I started working in libraries, this wasn't how I was trained or educated. So the work itself is just, you know, that creative content, and it hasn't been written down or anything like that. So once it's written down, then it becomes an expression.
Mm-hmm.
And then the manifestation can become the book or the movie. So if you look at this chart, so the work is the novel and the movie, and then the expression becomes the original text or a translation or a critical edition, and then the movie is coming from, you know, that's the original version, and then the manifestation is where it's written paper or a PDF or HTML, or if it's coming from the movie, it would be a DVD or VHS or whatever other formats movies come in. And then the item itself is when you're cataloging, that's what you are touching. That's what you're holding in your hand. That's what you are cataloging.
Mm-hmm.
Does that help?
Yes.
Okay.
A somewhat related question to one of the questions earlier. So another example, like sometimes movies come out that, that came out a long time ago, but then they're re-released as like enhanced digital, with enhanced digital qualities, updated, et cetera, et cetera. But largely the movie itself is the same. So for
It's
example, like a
unchanged.
Star Wars movies, where would that fall concerning equivalent and derivative relationships when you have a movie like that released in new digital form,
That it would be a derivative. To me, it would still be to the left of that, the dashed line. I would call it like that slight modification that's in the box right above the red line.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a new expression, right? But it's a derivative of the original work.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Well, with that, thank you everybody for your questions. And I guess we will finish up here a bit early. We'll do this again
Sorry.
next week, covering work, expression, manifestation, and item. As I said, still time for you guys to register for that. But with that, thank you, Pam. Thanks to all of you, and hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thanks. You too.
Okay. Bye now.